My name is Richard Lakeman. As a mental health nurse, I have vacillated between and often juggled both the pointy end of academic and clinical practice. In 2019, I returned to the university after a 5-year absence and noticed some quite profound changes. In particular, a miasma of despondency appeared to descend on my colleagues at regular intervals. This was linked to student evaluation of teaching surveys, which had become routine. A group of us were interested in exploring this further, so in 2021 we undertook a survey of teaching academics in Australia. About 800 people responded, and it seemed that receiving comments such as these, and sometimes much worse, is now a common experience. It wasn't always like this. I'd like to first consider how we arrived at this point in history, where slandering teachers is not unusual, if not the norm, because when I were a lad, we didn't have it quite so tough. I want to take you back 30-odd years to 1989, which was auspicious for many reasons. The fall of the Berlin Wall, for one, and the year I graduated with a diploma in comprehensive nursing. And also the release of the movie The Dead Poets Society. This was what I imagined university education and teaching would be like. Inspirational teachers holding captive an enthralled, highly motivated and interested audience. When I embarked on my first degree and teaching career, it was kind of like that. Small groups, one-to-one debates with scholars, and a requirement to read deeply and widely. In the old days, we had paper. The teacher would hand out evaluation forms at strategic points in a course and flick through them at the end. If someone did say something offensive, which would have been quite a rare event, the paper would be filed in the waste paper basket. Now, every university in Australia surveys students. These are almost always anonymous and online. They include ratings of teachers and courses, as well as the opportunity to make anonymous comments about anything. Ostensibly, they are about enhancing teaching and learning. However, these are widely used in performance reviews and positive evaluations necessary to maintain tenure or have contracts renewed. The rhetoric around student evaluation of teaching is saturated with management speak. The new managerialism has come to pervade every aspect of university life, as it has in public health services. In higher education, it gained impetus in 1989, which was the year which Labor introduced HECS, and soon after gave universities the go-ahead to charge what the market would bear. I'm only going to touch on some of these issues as they relate to this idea of student evaluation of teaching. The university is now first and foremost a business, and students consumers. The goal of every business is to grow. And grow it has. When I graduated in 1989, less than 7% of the population held a degree, and there were 400,000 students enrolled in university. This was a quadrupling of numbers since 1971. But in 2021, this had ballooned to over 1.6 million enrolments and around 60% of the population holding degrees. This massification has not led to an increase in teaching staff, with ratios of full-time teaching staff members to students, 1 to 16 in 1989 and 1 to 36 in 2020. Very few of these staff are teaching only, and almost all of the teaching only staff are sessional or contracted. It is hard to know how many. It was primarily these casual teaching only staff who lost their jobs in 2021, when universities were crying poor because of the loss of overseas enrolments due to COVID. There is good reason to believe that low esteem, high production courses such as nursing are doing it tougher than other branches of health. Health was the fastest growing field of study in the 2000s, but even in health, and counting all academic staff rather than just teachers, the ratio of staff to students was 1 to 28 in 2001 and 1 to 49 in 2020. This paints a picture of a tenuously employed workforce spread quite thinly and charged with keeping the consumers happy and ensuring they are successful. Unfortunately, the customers are not easy to keep happy. These are just some examples shared by respondents in our survey. We categorise these narrative statements into allegations, insults, comments about appearance, attire and accent, projections of blame, and threats and punishment. Personally destructive, defamatory, abusive and hurtful comments were commonly reported. These were often quite overtly racist, homophobic, misogynistic, and some could even be characterised as hate speech. What is more, these comments were routinely shared with others in the university. None of these examples had anything at all to do with teaching or learning quality, although 90% of respondents stated that comments had something to do with teaching quality at least sometimes. But what is the impact of receiving comments like these ever? When I were a lad, they might have been once or twice a year. My university has now moved to 6 terms of 6 weeks in a teaching year. Some are finding a marketing edge by going to 12 terms, 1 term a month. Forget about the free steak knives. What does this mean for teachers who are potentially exposed to anonymous hate speech every month, who have maybe 1 paid hour to mark and provide feedback to a student for an entire unit? They are the ones who are evaluated, not the university. Our research explored this as well. A majority of respondents attributed workplace stress to receiving anonymous commentary. Many reported being extremely distressed and considered that their health and mental health in particular had sometimes been severely impacted. Many people are experiencing post-traumatic type syndromes. They report being on edge, being emotionally numb, having sleep disturbances and nightmares, being triggered by even the talk of student evaluations, avoiding in as much as possible, engaging with the process. They engage in dysfunctional coping, alcohol misuse, attempting to ingratiate themselves to students, and so on. Some undoubtedly have PTSD, as death threats are relatively common, and there is a constant spectre of existential threat, that is being terminated, which is also a frequent theme. However, why should we care? Education is a business like any other, and as long as the consumer gets what they pay for, that's the main issue, right? Or we could just solve the problem of anonymous feedback, make that feedback identifiable and reduce exposure to hate speech. I think for mental health professionals, the problem is emblematic of something more concerning. From the get-go, our graduates learn that feedback is a weapon and that it is something to be feared or controlled. Feedback of the right kind is absolutely essential to develop self-awareness, which in turn is arguably essential to develop one's psychotherapeutic potential. Indeed, it is positively dangerous to not have any insight into how one may impact on others. At a macro level, this is played out in our public institutions, including health services and university, which gather endless amounts of information but know nothing. Our institutions either project massive facades whereby the image and news is managed and massaged to project and protect the image or brand, or they have massive blind spots. They just don't want to know the truth if it's not in accord with their idealised self-image. One sees this in response to inquiries and crises over and over again. For example, Queensland's public mental health services are highly coercive. Every acute ward in the state is locked. Over 20,000 people are brought to EDs under coercion each year. Over half of all beds are occupied by people who are compelled to be there under law, and a good many others are under duress. Numerous submissions were made to this committee about the need to reduce coercion. However, nowhere in this document is it mentioned that the doors are locked. The term coercion can't be found, and despite 47 references to emergency, nowhere does it acknowledge that a large number of people are compelled to attend emergency departments. The size of the institutional blind spot is staggering. Of course, there are truths we just don't want to know about, and the best way to avoid that is to carefully massage the questions and resist any unsolicited feedback. The Union for University Employees, the NTEU, recently tried to survey employees at my university. The link was flagged as unsafe, about the only unsafe link I've ever encountered. My point is that even this highly impersonal feedback was considered, at least symbolically, unsafe. How can we expect that would-be health professionals are going to embrace highly personal feedback when all the cues are that it is dangerous, unsafe? Is it any wonder that nurses don't exactly rush with enthusiasm to clinical supervision in the spirit of self-inquiry and self-development? That rather it is often reduced to an antidote to burnout and an opportunity to express one's frustrations with managers. None of this might matter to nurses who work in mental health if one accepts this uncontested definition of nursing as simply performing tasks in the assessment and management of people's health. The definition asserted in the report of the Queensland Parliamentary Inquiry. These tasks are largely ordered by others or mandated by employers. So how much feedback does one need to develop mastery over tasks like locking doors, completing forms, dispensing medication, making beds, etc.? I'm sure I'm not alone in being affronted by how nurses are seen by others, including our employers and political masters. This kind of feedback can be unsettling. I know that nurses and mental health nurses can and ought to be so much more than someone who has got a ticket from a university. To realise the potential for nurses to be a therapeutic force, to facilitate change and growth, to embody the Rogerian skills and disposition to enable change, such as congruence, the communication of empathy and unconditional positive regard, requires more than openness to feedback. As in the development of psychotherapeutic skills generally, nurses need to embrace processes to elicit genuine feedback, to develop insights into how they are in relationship with others. Because good nursing care is primarily about being in relationship with people, not merely doing things to them. This involves actively eliciting feedback to reduce blind spots, engaging in processes, including personal therapy, to discover the known and unknown about oneself, and dropping the facade in the interests of being genuine. Feedback in general and student evaluations of teaching should not be just about getting to the top of the ratings or blowing hot air. Neither should it be just a meaningless bureaucratic exercise or an opportunity to punish and wound others. I have my own thoughts on processes to restore respectful feedback to its rightful position, and some of these hark back again to when I were a lad, so to speak. I don't have time to elaborate today. But I do think we need to get this right at the institutional level, both in universities and health services, if there is to be any chance of feedback contributing to positive change or transformation. Thank you.